Steep Teas and Mysteries presents an original murder mystery story in the Quaint Killings series. Book 3, The Missing Fisherman. Chapter 1, Hooked on a Bad Feeling. The Willowmere Flow glittered like a silver thread woven through the heart of Willowmere, its gentle currents reflecting the late spring sun in a dazzling dance of light. On this particular Saturday, the riverbanks were alive with the annual spring fishing tournament, a beloved tradition that drew anglers from near and far to compete for the coveted goldenrod trophy. A gleaming fishing rod mounted on a polished wooden plaque, said to bring its winner a year of good luck and bragging rights. Bright banners in shades of red, blue, and yellow fluttered in the breeze, strung between ancient willows whose branches dipped into the water, as if they too were trying to snag a fish. The air was thick with the mingled scents of fried dough from the food stalls, the earthy musk of the river, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers blooming in vibrant patches along the grassy slopes. Spectators lined the banks, sprawled on picnic blankets or perched on folding chairs, their cheers and laughter echoing as anglers waded into the shallows, fly rods in hand, casting their lines with practiced precision. Amelia Harrow stood near the edge of the crowd, her sturdy boots sinking slightly into the soft, muddy grass, a cup of lemonade sweating in her hand. She'd come to soak in the festive atmosphere and cheer on Jed Harper, a local fisherman who'd been grumbling about his fancy new waders for weeks, claiming they were more trouble than they were worth. But as she sipped her lemonade, the tartness doing little to distract her, her mind kept drifting to darker waters. Last spring, Willowmere had been shaken by the arrest of Hank Rawls, a volatile man who'd gone on a rampage through the Willowmere Inn's garden, tearing up Lillian's prized flower boxes in a fit of rage. The incident had left the town on edge, with whispers of scandal lingering long after Hank was hauled away in cuffs. And just a few weeks ago, the Flow had coughed up a grim secret, a body with a strange hook embedded in its neck, sparking rumors of a mysterious packed relic that Amelia still couldn't quite shake from her thoughts. She'd seen enough in Willowmere to know that trouble often lurked beneath its quaint surface, and today her gut was telling her something was off, like a fishhook snagging at her instincts, pulling her toward an unseen danger. "Amelia, you seen Tommy Trout Larson yet?" Lillian Nassif called, her voice cutting through the hum of the crowd as she weaved her way toward Amelia. A tray of freshly baked scones balanced precariously in her hands. Flour dusted her apron, and her dark curls were escaping their bun, bouncing with each step as she dodged a kid chasing a runaway balloon shaped like a fish. Lillian's warm smile never faltered, even under the chaos of the tournament. She was the heart of the Willowmere Inn, always ready with a kind word or a baked good to brighten someone's day. Amelia shook her head, her braids swinging against her back as she squinted at the river, where anglers were casting their lines with rhythmic flicks of their wrists. "Not yet," she said, her voice tinged with a concern she couldn't quite hide. "He's probably out there showing off, though. You know Tommy loves an audience more than a fish loves water." Tommy Larson, a wiry man with a weathered face and a penchant for tall tales, had earned his nickname after reeling in a trout so massive it had made the front page of the Willowmere Gazette. The fish had been nearly 2 feet long, a record for the Flow, and Tommy had basked in the glory ever since, regaling anyone who'd listen with the story of how he'd battled the beast for nearly an hour before hauling it in. But as the morning stretched on, with the sun climbing higher in the sky and the crowd's cheers echoing across the water, Tommy was nowhere to be seen, a fact that gnawed at Amelia's nerves like a fish nibbling at bait. Eleanor Price stumbled over, her sneakers catching on a gnarled root as she clutched her binoculars, nearly dropping them in her haste. "These roots are out to get me, I swear," she muttered, adjusting her glasses with a huff that sent her gray bangs fluttering. "I'm one trip away from tossing these shoes in the river and going barefoot." Eleanor was a bundle of energy, her enthusiasm for sleuthing matched only by her knack for finding trouble, usually in the form of uneven terrain. "I saw Tommy earlier, casting near the bend like he owned the whole Flow," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and worry. "But he's vanished. Maybe he's off chasing that mermaid trout everyone keeps yapping about. You know, the one folks say grants wishes if you catch it? She chuckled, her laugh a little forced, but her smile faltered when she caught the frown creasing Amelia's brow. Let's check with Clarence Pike, Amelia suggested, her tone decisive as she led the way through the crowd, dodging a pair of kids playing tag and an angler hauling a bucket of bait. Clarence, the tournament organizer, stood near the scoreboard, a stout man with a walrus mustache that seemed to have a life of its own, twitching with every nervous glance he cast over the river. His clipboard trembled in his hands as he scribbled notes, his face flushed with the stress of managing a tournament that drew more competitors each year. The scoreboard behind him listed the morning's catches, with Tommy's name at the top. A 12-inch trout logged at 9 o'clock, a strong start that had put him in the lead. "Clarence, have you seen Tommy Larson?" Amelia asked, cutting straight through the noise of the crowd. "He's not at the scoreboard, and no one spotted him in the water for a while." Clarence's mustache twitched violently, and he let out a heavy sigh that seemed to deflate him. "I was just about to send out a search party," he admitted, his voice shaky as he clutched his clipboard like a lifeline. "Tommy logged that 12-incher at 9, but no one's seen him since. I've got a few folks looking, but with all these people—" He gestured helplessly at the bustling riverbank, where spectators and anglers mingled in a chaotic dance of activity, kids running with balloons, anglers swapping stories, and vendors hawking their wares. His clipboard nearly slipped from his grip, and he fumbled to catch it, his face growing redder by the second. Lillian set her tray of scones on a nearby table, her hands on her hips as she fixed Clarence with a stern look. "Missing?" she echoed, her tone sharp enough to cut through the hum of the crowd. "Clarence, this is a fishing tournament, not a game of hide-and-seek. We need to search the river now. Tommy's not the type to just wander off in the middle of a competition, especially when he's in the lead." Amelia nodded, her mind racing as she scanned the riverbank for a starting point. "We'll help," she said, her voice steady despite the knot of worry tightening in her chest. "Eleanor, you take the downstream stretch. Check near the bridge where the anglers are gathering. Lillian, ask around the food stalls. Someone might have seen him grabbing a bite. I'll head upstream toward the bend. That's where Eleanor saw him last." The women split up, their movements quick and purposeful, a well-oiled machine honed by their recent adventures in crime-solving. Amelia jogged along the gravelly path that hugged the riverbank, her boots crunching against the stones, the river's gentle gurgle a constant companion as she moved upstream. The crowd thinned out as she went, the cheers fading into a distant hum, replaced by the rustle of leaves in the breeze and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. She passed Jed Harper, a grizzled fisherman with a permanent scowl, who was untangling his line with a string of muttered curses, his new waders already streaked with mud and algae. "Jed, you seen Tommy?" Amelia asked, pausing to catch her breath, her hands on her hips as she scanned the water. "Nope," Jed grunted, yanking at a knot with more force than necessary, his frustration evident in the way his shoulders tensed. "He was at the bend earlier, showing off that 12-inch trout like he'd already won the whole dang tournament. Got under a few folks' skin, Nate Carver especially." He nodded toward a burly man downstream, Nate Carver, who was casting his line with a focus that bordered on fury, his broad shoulders hunched and his jaw set in a hard line. Nate's presence on the riverbank was imposing, his movements deliberate, as if he were trying to prove something with every flick of his rod. Amelia made a mental note, her eyes narrowing as she watched Nate for a moment. Nate was Thomas Carver's nephew, and the Carver family had been the talk of Main Street since Thomas's shady dealings at Willowmere Woodworks had come to light last fall. Thomas had been caught selling furniture made with cheap imported wood while passing it off as locally sourced, a scandal that had tarnished the family's reputation and left Nate with a chip on his shoulder the size of a trout. "Thanks, Jed," Amelia said, her tone clipped as she continued upstream, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust on the path. The bend was a quieter spot on the flow, where the river deepened and the current slowed, creating a natural pool that was a favorite among anglers chasing the bigger fish. The willows here formed a thick curtain of green, their branches hanging low over the water, casting dappled shadows on the surface that danced with the breeze. It was the perfect place for a fisherman to chase a legendary catch, or for something to go terribly wrong. Amelia pushed through the reeds, her jeans snagging on a thorn that tore a small hole in the fabric, and she muttered a curse under her breath as she disentangled herself. The air here was cooler, the scent of the river stronger, and the hum of the tournament felt like a distant memory as the solitude of the bend enveloped her. That's when she saw it. A fly rod, its line tangled in the undergrowth, bobbing against the bank like a forgotten toy. Her heart pounded in her chest as she waded into the shallows, the cold water soaking her legs through her jeans, sending a shiver up her spine. She tugged the rod free, the line snapping with a faint twang, and her breath caught in her throat, a gasp escaping her lips as she stumbled back. There, tangled in the reeds like a grim catch, was Tommy Larson's body. His face was pale, almost ghostly white, his eyes staring blankly at the sky, unseeing and hollow. A deep gash on his temple oozed blood, the crimson stark against his pallid skin, trickling into the water and staining the reeds a rusty red. His waders were snagged on a gnarled root, holding him in place like a macabre trophy, his body swaying slightly with the gentle current. "Tommy?" Amelia shouted, her voice cracking with a mix of shock and horror as she dropped to her knees in the shallows, the water lapping at her thighs. She reached out, her hands trembling as she checked for a pulse, pressing her fingers against his cold, clammy neck. But there was nothing, no faint beat, no sign of life. His skin was icy to the touch, his body limp and heavy in the water. The gash on his temple wasn't from a fall. It was too clean, too deliberate, the edges sharp and precise. Someone had hit him, hard, with intent to kill, and left him here to be found, his body a silent testament to the violence that had unfolded on this quiet stretch of river. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it into the water, her fingers slick with river muck. She managed to dial Samuel Carter, her voice tight and strained as she spoke. "Samuel, it's Amelia," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm at the bend on the flow. Tommy Larson's dead. Murdered. You need to get here now." Amelia sat back on her heels, the river's chill seeping into her bones as she stared at Tommy's lifeless form, her mind reeling. The Willowmere Flow had claimed another victim. Just weeks after that hooked body had turned up in the same waters, its strange hook sparking whispers of a packed relic that still haunted Amelia's thoughts. She didn't know what secrets this river held, what dark currents ran beneath its shimmering surface, but she was determined to find out, starting with who wanted Tommy Trout Larson dead, and why they'd chosen this sunny spring day to end his life. Chapter 2. Reeling in the Suspects. The Willowmere Flow's festive atmosphere had evaporated like morning mist by the time Samuel Carter's sheriff's truck roared up the river path, its tires kicking up clouds of dust that shimmered in the late spring sun. The tournament crowd had thinned out, the bright banners hanging limply between the willows as spectators whispered among themselves, their earlier cheers replaced by a tense murmur. The food stalls were still open, their vendors half-heartedly calling out to the few remaining stragglers, but the scent of fried dough now mingled with an undercurrent of unease. Anglers packed up their gear with grim faces, their fly rods stowed away as the reality of Tommy Trout Larson's death settled over the riverbank like a heavy fog. The golden-rod trophy sat untouched on the scoreboard table, its polished surface catching the sunlight, a stark reminder of the day's tragedy. Amelia Harrow stood near the bend where she'd found Tommy's body, her jeans still soaked from wading into the shallows, the cold water clinging to her legs like a second skin. She'd stayed put after calling Samuel, her eyes fixed on Tommy's lifeless form tangled in the reeds, his pale face and the deep gash on his temple, a haunting image she couldn't shake. The river's gentle gurgle seemed to mock the violence that had unfolded here, its serene beauty at odds with the darkness it had witnessed. Amelia's mind raced, replaying the morning's events, Tommy's absence, Jed's comment about Nate Carver, the tournament's competitive energy. She'd seen enough in Willowmere to know that murder often hid behind the town's quaint facade, and this was no accident. Samuel Carter strode over, his broad shoulders parting the small crowd of onlookers who'd gathered at a safe distance, his sheriff's badge glinting in the sunlight. His piney cologne cut through the fishy river air, a familiar scent that grounded Amelia even as her stomach churned. Lillian Nassif and Eleanor Price trailed behind him, their faces a mix of worry and determination. Lillian's apron was still dusted with flour, her tray of scones long abandoned at the food stalls, while Eleanor clutched her binoculars, her glasses slipping down her nose as she nearly tripped over a root again. "Amelia, what have we got?" Samuel asked, his voice low and steady as he crouched beside her, his eyes narrowing as he took in Tommy's body. The gash on Tommy's temple was stark against his pallid skin, the blood crusted and dark, staining the reeds a rusty red. "Tommy Larson," Amelia said, her voice tight as she gestured to the body. "I found him tangled in the reeds, just like that hooked body we pulled out of the flow a few weeks back. That gash, it's no accident, Samuel. Someone hit him hard and left him here to be found." She pointed to the fly rod she'd pulled from the undergrowth, its line still tangled in the reeds. "This was floating nearby. Might be his, might not. But it's a start." Samuel nodded, his jaw tightening as he examined the scene, his gloved hands careful not to disturb the body. "Looks like murder, all right," he said, his tone grim. "I'll get the coroner out here, but from the look of that gash, I'd say he was hit with a blunt object, likely a rock given the sediment in the wound. No defensive wounds on his hands, so he didn't see it coming. Probably someone he knew." He stood, brushing off his knees, and turned to his deputies, who were already cordoning off the area with yellow tape. "Clear the crowd. Get statements from anyone who was near the bend this morning. We've got a killer on the loose." Lillian crossed her arms, her brow furrowing as she glanced at the river. "Someone he knew?" she echoed, her voice sharp. "That narrows it down to just about every angler here. Tommy was the favorite to win. He had a target on his back the size of a trout." She shook her head, her dark curls bouncing with the motion. "We need to start asking questions, Samuel. Who'd want him out of the way bad enough to bash his head in?" Eleanor adjusted her glasses, her binoculars dangling around her neck like a badge of honor. "I saw Tommy at the bend around 9:30, casting like he owned the river," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and nerves. "He was in the lead, logged that 12-incher at 9, but he got under a few folks' skin with all his bragging. Jed Harper mentioned Nate Carver wasn't too happy about it." She paused, then added with a dramatic huff, "And if I trip over one more root while we're sleuthing, I'm tossing these sneakers in the flow and calling it a day." Amelia managed a small smile despite the circumstances, Eleanor's grumbling a welcome bit of levity in the grim moment. "Let's start with Nate, then," she said, her tone decisive. "Jed said he was riled up about Tommy. Might be worth a chat. But we should talk to Clarence Pike, too. He's running the tournament. He'll know who else might have had a grudge." The women headed toward the scoreboard, where Clarence Pike was still stationed, his walrus mustache twitching as he fielded questions from a handful of anxious anglers. His clipboard was a mess of scribbled notes, and his face was flushed, his stress evident in the way he kept wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "Ladies, please tell me you've got good news," he said as they approached, his voice tinged with desperation. "This tournament's turning into a nightmare. First Tommy goes missing, and now I hear he's dead?" "Murdered," Amelia confirmed, her voice steady but firm. "We found him at the bend, Clarence. Samuel's handling the scene, but we need to know who might have had it out for Tommy. Anyone been acting off today? Any big rivalries we should know about?" Clarence's mustache twitched violently, and he let out a heavy sigh. "Tommy was a lightning rod, I'll give you that," he admitted, flipping through his clipboard with trembling hands. "He's been the favorite to win for years, always bragging about that record trout he caught a while back. But this year, there's been some bad blood. Nate Carver's been sore about losing to him last tournament, said Tommy played dirty. And my daughter, Clara Pike, she's been fuming about Tommy ever since last year's competition. Claims he cheated to win the golden rod, used an illegal weighted lure to beat her. She's been saying he shouldn't even be allowed to compete this year." Amelia exchanged a glance with Lillian and Eleanor, her mind racing. "Clara's here today?" she asked, her eyes scanning the crowd for Clarence's fiery daughter. Clara Pike was a petite but fierce angler, her red hair and freckled face a familiar sight at the flow, her competitive streak as sharp as a fishhook. "She's around," Clarence said, nodding toward the bridge where a group of anglers were gathered, their voices low as they swapped theories about Tommy's death. "But I don't think she wouldn't." He trailed off, his face paling as the implication sank in. "Let's talk to her," Lillian said, her tone firm as she adjusted her apron, brushing off a bit of flour. "And Nate, too. If there's bad blood, we need to know how bad it got." They found Nate Carver near the bridge, packing his tackle box with a scowl that could curdle milk. He was a bear of a man, broad-shouldered with a scruffy beard, his waders still dripping from the river. His eyes flicked up as the women approached, narrowing with suspicion. "What do you want?" he growled, slamming his tackle box shut with a bang that made Eleanor jump. "Nate, we're looking into Tommy's death," Amelia said, keeping her tone casual but firm. "Heard you two had some words this morning. Care to tell us about it?" Nate's scowl deepened and he crossed his arms, his stance defensive. "Tommy was a loudmouth," he said, his voice gruff. "Kept bragging about that trout he caught, like he was the only one who ever hooked a fish. Said he'd win the goldenrod again this year. Rub it in my face. I told him to shut it, but that's it. I didn't touch him, if that's what you're getting at." He glanced at the river, his jaw tightening. "I was downstream all morning. Ask anyone." Lillian raised an eyebrow, her hands on her hips. "No one's accusing you, Nate," she said, her tone measured. "We're just trying to piece things together. Did you see anyone else near the bend? Maybe someone who looked mad enough to bash his head in?" Nate hesitated, his gaze shifting to the ground. "I saw Clara Pike heading that way around 10, he said finally, his voice low. "She was fuming, muttering about Tommy cheating her out of the trophy last year. You should talk to her. She's got a temper on her, that one." Amelia nodded, filing that away as they thanked Nate and moved on. Clara Pike was near the food stalls, her red hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, her freckled face flushed with anger as she argued with a vendor over a burnt piece of fried dough. "Clara, got a minute?" Amelia called, waving her over. Clara spun to face them, her green eyes blazing. "What do you want?" she snapped, crossing her arms. "I'm not in the mood for chit-chat." "We're looking into Tommy's murder," Amelia said, her voice calm but direct. "Your dad said you've been upset with him since last year's tournament. Something about him cheating with a weighted lure?" Clara's face darkened, and she let out a bitter laugh. "Upset doesn't cover it," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Tommy cheated me out of the goldenrod last year, used an illegal lure to beat me, and everyone knows it. I should have won that trophy, not him. I told Dad to ban him this year, but he wouldn't listen." She shook her head, her fists clenching at her sides. "I was upstream all morning, fishing with the others. I didn't see Tommy after he logged that 12-incher. But if you're looking for someone with a grudge, you're looking at the wrong person. Check with Jed Harper. Tommy beat him in a side bet last week, and Jed was livid." Lillian frowned, glancing at Amelia. "Jed didn't mention that," she said quietly as they walked away, heading back toward the bend to regroup with Samuel. "Think he's holding out on us?" "Maybe," Amelia said, her mind racing. "But Clara's got a temper, and that cheating rumor gives her a motive to want Tommy out of the picture. We need to dig deeper, see if her alibi holds up." The Willowmere Flow glittered in the midday sun, its beauty a cruel contrast to the dark secrets it held. Amelia knew they were just scratching the surface of this mystery, but with every question, they were reeling in the truth, one suspect at a time. Chapter 3. A Fishy Alibi. The Willowmere Flow shimmered under the midday sun, its surface a deceptive mirror of calm that belied the dark currents running beneath. The spring fishing tournament was officially over, the remaining spectators and anglers drifting away like leaves on the water, their voices hushed as they cast wary glances toward the cordoned-off bend where Tommy Trout Larson's body had been found. The bright banners still hung between the willows, but their colors seemed muted now, the festive spirit of the morning replaced by a heavy silence that hung over the riverbank. The food stalls were packing up, their vendors tossing out the last of the fried dough and lemonade, the air now carrying only the faint scent of the river, earthy and slightly fishy, with a hint of the wildflowers that clung to the grassy slopes. Amelia Harrow stood near the scoreboard, her arms crossed, as she watched Samuel Carter direct his deputies, their yellow tape fluttering in the breeze as they secured the crime scene. Her jeans were still damp from wading into the flow to find Tommy, the cold fabric clinging to her legs, but her focus was razor-sharp, her mind turning over the clues they'd gathered so far. Nate Carver's defensiveness, Clara Pike's fiery anger, and now Jed Harper's name in the mix. It was a tangled net of suspects. And Amelia was determined to untangle it. Lillian Nassif and Eleanor Price stood beside her, their faces a mix of determination and unease, the weight of another murder in Willowmere settling heavily on their shoulders. "We need to talk to Jed about that side bet Clara mentioned," Amelia said, her voice low as she glanced toward the bridge where Jed Harper was packing up his gear, his scowl deeper than ever. If Tommy beat him last week, he might have been holding a grudge big enough to act on it. Lillian nodded, brushing a bit of flour off her apron, her dark curls bouncing as she adjusted her stance. "Jed's not one to take losing lightly," she said, her tone thoughtful. "Remember how he sulked for a month after losing the pie-eating contest at the fall festival? If Tommy rubbed salt in the wound, Jed might have snapped." She paused, then added with a small smirk, "Though if he's our killer, I'm not sure I'd want to be the one to tell him his new waders are already torn." Eleanor chuckled, adjusting her glasses as she clutched her binoculars, her gray bangs fluttering in the breeze. "I'll leave that to you, Lillian," she said, her voice tinged with amusement. "But I'm more worried about Clara's alibi. She said she was upstream all morning, but Nate saw her heading toward the bend around 10, right around the time Samuel thinks Tommy was killed. We need to check her story, see if anyone can vouch for her." Amelia nodded, her braids swinging against her back as she led the way toward Jed. "Let's start with Jed, then circle back to Clara," she said, her tone decisive. "If her alibi doesn't hold up, she's looking more like a suspect by the minute." Jed Harper was near the bridge, his tackle box open on the ground as he sorted through his lures with a scowl that could scare off a fish. His new waders were indeed torn, a jagged rip along the thigh exposing a patch of muddy skin, and his grizzled face was set in a permanent frown as he muttered to himself about lousy knots and cheating braggarts. He looked up as the women approached, his scowl deepening, his hands stilling on a particularly shiny lure. "Jed, we need to talk," Amelia said, keeping her tone neutral but firm as she stopped a few feet away, her arms crossed. "Clara Pike mentioned you and Tommy had a side bet last week, one you lost. Why didn't you tell us about that?" Jed's eyes narrowed, and he let out a long, exasperated sigh, tossing the lure into his tackle box with a clatter. "Didn't think it mattered," he grunted, scratching his stubbled chin with a calloused hand. "Yeah, we bet $50 on who'd catch the biggest fish last week. Tommy won barely, mind you. I was sore about it, sure, but I didn't kill him over it. I've been downstream all morning, fishing with the others. Ask anyone. They'll tell you I was nowhere near the bend when Tommy went missing." Lillian raised an eyebrow, her hands on her hips as she fixed Jed with a skeptical look. "You sure about that, Jed?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Because you were plenty mad when Tommy started bragging this morning, and losing a bet to him last week. Well, that's 2 strikes against you. Where exactly were you between 9 and 10:30? Jed's scowl deepened, but his gaze shifted to the ground, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "I told you I was downstream," he said, his voice gruff. "I saw Clara Pike heading toward the bend around 10, though. She looked mad enough to spit nails, muttered something about Tommy not deserving to be here. You should be talking to her, not me." Amelia exchanged a glance with Lillian and Eleanor, her mind racing. Jed's alibi sounded solid, but that flicker of unease in his eyes made her wonder if he was holding something back. "Thanks. Jed," she said, her tone clipped. "We'll check your story. Don't go far. Samuel might have more questions." As they walked away, Eleanor lowered her voice, her binoculars swinging around her neck. "He's hiding something," she whispered, her eyes wide behind her glasses. "Did you see how he wouldn't look at us when he mentioned Clara? I bet he knows more than he's letting on." "Maybe," Amelia said, her brow furrowing. "But Clara's alibi is looking shakier by the minute. Let's find someone who can confirm where she was between 9 and 10:30. They headed toward the group of anglers near the bridge, where a few stragglers were still swapping stories about the morning's catches, their voices low as they glanced toward the crime scene. Amelia spotted a familiar face, Maggie Reed, a local angler with a knack for gossip, who was sipping lemonade and chatting with a couple of older fishermen. Maggie's curly blonde hair was tucked under a wide-brimmed hat, and her freckled face lit up with curiosity as the women approached. "Maggie, got a minute?" Amelia asked, offering a small smile to put her at ease. "We're looking into Tommy's murder. Can you tell us if you saw Clara Pike this morning? Specifically between 9 and 10:30? Maggie's eyes widened, and she set her lemonade down on a nearby table, her hands fluttering with excitement. "Oh, I heard about Tommy. Horrible, just horrible," she said, her voice a mix of shock and eagerness. "I did see Clara, now that you mention it. She was upstream with us for a bit, casting near the shallows, but I saw her slip away around 10. She looked furious, muttering something about Tommy cheating her out of the goldenrod last year. I figured she was just blowing off steam, but, well, now I'm not so sure." Lillian frowned, her arms crossing as she processed Maggie's words. "So Clara was heading toward the bend around 10, she said, her voice low. "That puts her at the scene right around the time of death, her alibi's looking more like a tall tale than a trout." "Let's search the bend," Amelia suggested, her tone decisive. "If Clara was there, she might have left something behind, something we can use to tie her to the murder." The women made their way back to the cordoned-off area, where Samuel was wrapping up with the coroner, his deputies taking photos of the scene. The yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, a stark barrier between the crime scene and the rest of the riverbank. Samuel looked up as they approached, his face etched with exhaustion, his piney cologne still lingering in the air. "You ladies got something for me?" he asked, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "Clara's alibi doesn't hold up," Amelia said, filling him in on Maggie's statement and Nate's sighting of Clara near the bend. "She was there around 10, Samuel, right in the window you gave for Tommy's death. We're going to search the area, see if we can find anything that places her at the scene." Samuel nodded, his expression darkening. "Good work," he said, his voice grim. "The coroner confirmed time of death between 9 and 10:30, closer to 10 based on the body's temperature. The gash was definitely from a blunt object, likely a rock, and we found some sediment in the wound that matches the riverbank here. Keep looking. I'll have my team sweep the area, too." The women fanned out along the riverbank, careful not to disturb the crime scene markers, their eyes scanning the muddy ground and the tangled reeds. The river lapped gently against the shore, its surface catching the sunlight in a dazzling display, but the beauty felt hollow now, a cruel contrast to the violence it had witnessed. Amelia focused on the area where she'd found Tommy's fly rod, her boots sinking into the soft earth as she pushed through the undergrowth. That's when she spotted it. A small fishing lure, half buried in the dirt, its hook stained with a dark, rusty smear. Blood. The lure was one of those fancy ones with a red feather and a silver weight, exactly the kind Clara was known for using, her signature on the river. "Lillian, Eleanor, over here," Amelia called. Crouching to get a better look, her heart pounding in her chest, she used a stick to carefully lift the lure, avoiding the blood as she held it up for the others to see. "This is Clara's. I've seen her use these before, and that looks like blood. If it's Tommy's, it places her at the scene," Lillian finished, her eyes wide as she stepped closer, her apron flapping in the breeze. "We need to get this to Samuel, now." Eleanor clutched her binoculars, her face pale behind her glasses. "I knew her alibi was fishier than a barrel of trout," she said, her voice a mix of triumph and nerves. "But a bloody lure? That's not just fishy, it's a whole net of trouble." Amelia nodded, her resolve hardening as they hurried back to Samuel, the lure held carefully in her hand. The Willowmere Flow had given up one of its secrets, but she had a feeling there were more to uncover. Clara Pike had some serious explaining to do, and they were running out of time to reel her in. Chapter 4. Casting for Clues. The Willowmere Flow had settled into an eerie calm by early afternoon, the last of the spring fishing tournament's spectators and anglers long gone, leaving the riverbank to the whispers of the willows and the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. The bright banners that had once fluttered with festive energy now hung limp, their colors muted in the slanting sunlight, as if the river itself were mourning the loss of Tommy Trout Larson. The food stalls had packed up, their tables cleared of fried dough and lemonade cups, leaving behind only the faint scent of grease and sugar that mingled with the earthy musk of the river. The yellow crime scene tape at the bend fluttered in the breeze, a stark reminder of the violence that had shattered the day. Its vivid color clashing with the serene beauty of the flow, a beauty that felt hollow now, a cruel facade hiding the dark secrets beneath its shimmering surface. Amelia Harrow stood near the scoreboard, the bloody lure they'd found at the bend clutched carefully in a handkerchief, its red feather and silver weight a damning piece of evidence against Clara Pike. Her jeans were still damp from the river, the cold fabric sticking to her legs, but her focus was unshakable, her mind turning over the clues they'd gathered. Clara's alibi had crumbled like a house of cards, and the lure placed her at the scene of Tommy's murder, but Amelia knew they needed more to seal the case, something concrete to tie her to the act itself. Lillian Nassif and Eleanor Price stood beside her, their faces a mix of determination and unease, the weight of another murder in Willowmere pressing down on them like a heavy fog. "We need to confront Clara with this," Amelia said, her voice low as she held up the lure, its blood-stained hook catching the light. She can't deny being at the bend now, not with her signature lure covered in Tommy's blood. But we should double-check Jed's alibi, too. He's been too quick to point fingers at Clara, and I don't trust that he's telling us everything. Lillian nodded, brushing a stray curl from her face as she adjusted her flour-dusted apron, her hands steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "Jed's alibi might hold, but he's got a temper," she said, her tone thoughtful. "And that side bet with Tommy. $50 might not seem like much, but to Jed, it's pride on the line. He's the kind of man who'd hold a grudge over a lost bait bucket, let alone a bet." She paused, then added with a small smirk, "Though if he's our killer, I hope he's better at hiding evidence than he is at keeping those new waiters in one piece." Eleanor chuckled, her binoculars dangling around her neck as she adjusted her glasses, her gray bangs fluttering in the breeze. "I'll leave the waiter roasting to you, Lillian," she said, her voice tinged with amusement. "But I agree, Jed's hiding something. Did you see how he wouldn't look us in the eye when we asked about Clara? I bet he knows more than he's letting on. And Clara, well, that lure's got her name written all over it, but we need to hear what she has to say for herself." Amelia nodded, her braids swinging against her back as she led the way toward the bridge, where Clara Pike was still lingering, her red hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, her freckled face flushed with a mix of anger and anxiety. She was arguing with another angler, a wiry man named Ben Foster, about the tournament's cancellation, her voice sharp as she gestured wildly with her hands. "Clara, we need to talk," Amelia called, her tone firm as she approached, the lure still clutched in her handkerchief. Clara spun to face them, her green eyes blazing with defiance, her arms crossing tightly over her chest. "What now?" She snapped, her voice dripping with irritation. "I already told you. I was upstream all morning. I didn't see Tommy after he logged that 12-incher. You're wasting your time barking up the wrong tree." Amelia held up the lure, her expression unyielding as she met Clara's gaze. "We found this at the bend, Clara," she said, her voice steady. "Right where Tommy was killed. It's one of yours, red feather, silver weight, just like the ones you always use. And it's got blood on it, Tommy's blood, we're betting. Care to explain how it got there, if you were upstream all morning?" Clara's face paled, the flush draining from her cheeks as her eyes darted to the lure, her hands dropping to her sides. That's not mine," she stammered, her voice trembling as she took a step back, her bravado crumbling. "I mean, it looks like mine, but I wasn't at the bend. Someone must have planted it there to frame me." Lillian raised an eyebrow, her hands on her hips as she fixed Clara with a skeptical look. "Planted it?" she echoed, her tone sharp. "Clara, we've got witnesses who saw you heading toward the bend around 10, right when Tommy was killed. Your alibi's sunk faster than a lead sinker. You'd better start talking, or Samuel's going to have a lot more questions for you than we do." Clara's eyes filled with tears, her defiance giving way to panic as she shook her head. her red ponytail whipping back and forth. "I didn't kill him," she cried, her voice breaking. "Yes, I went to the bend. I wanted to confront Tommy about last year. He cheated me out of the golden rod with that weighted lure, and I was sick of him acting like he was untouchable. I told him he didn't deserve to be here, that he should have been banned, but he just laughed at me, said I'd never beat him, that I was just a sore loser. I lost my temper, okay? I threw my lure at him, hit him in the chest, not the head. I didn't even see any blood. Then I stormed off. I swear, he was alive when I left." Amelia exchanged a glance with Lillian and Eleanor, her mind racing. Clara's story was plausible. Throwing a lure wouldn't cause a gash like the one on Tommy's head, and the blood on the hook could have come from a nick on his skin. But her presence at the bend, her anger, and the timing still made her a prime suspect. "We'll let Samuel test the blood on this lure," Amelia said, her tone firm. "But if you're telling the truth, Clara, you'd better hope we find something else at the bend that backs up your story, because right now, it's not looking good for you." As they walked away, Eleanor lowered her voice, her binoculars swinging around her neck. "She's either a really good liar or someone else finished the job after she left," she whispered, her eyes wide behind her glasses. "I mean, throwing a lure at someone isn't exactly a love letter, but it's not a murder weapon either. We need to keep looking." "Let's head back to the bend," Amelia suggested, her tone decisive. "If Clara's telling the truth, there might be something else there, something that points to the real killer. And we should check in with Samuel, see if he's found anything new." They made their way back to the cordoned-off area where Samuel Carter was overseeing his deputies as they combed the riverbank, their gloved hands sifting through the reeds and mud. The yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, a stark barrier between the crime scene and the rest of the flow, and Samuel's piney cologne cut through the fishy river air as he turned to greet them. "You ladies look like you've got something," he said, wiping his brow with a handkerchief, his face etched with exhaustion. "We confronted Clara with this," Amelia said, holding up the lure, still wrapped in her handkerchief. "She admits she was at the bend. Says she confronted Tommy about last year's cheating, threw the lure at him in a fit of anger, but claims he was alive when she left. The blood on the hook might be his, but it doesn't explain the gash on his head." Samuel took the lure, his expression darkening as he bagged it as evidence. "We'll test it for Tommy's DNA," he said, his voice grim. "But I've got something for you, too. One of my deputies found a rock about 10 feet from where Tommy's body was, has blood on it, matches the sediment in the wound. Looks like our murder weapon. No fingerprints, though. Either the killer wiped it clean or the river washed them off." Lillian's eyes widened, her hands on her hips as she processed Samuel's words. "A rock with blood on it," she said, her voice low. "That's what killed Tommy. Not a lure. So either Clara's lying and she came back to finish the job, or someone else was there after she left." "Let's talk to Jed again," Amelia said, her tone decisive. "He was quick to point us toward Clara, but if he was at the bend after her, he might have seen something, or done something. We need to press him harder." They found Jed Harper near the food stalls, where he was buying a cup of coffee from one of the last vendors. His grizzled face still set in a scowl as he muttered about the tournament's cancellation. His torn waders were caked with mud, and his tackle box sat at his feet, its lid open to reveal a jumble of lures and hooks. "Jed, we've got more questions," Amelia said, her voice firm as she approached, her arms crossed. Jed groaned, setting his coffee down on the table with a thud. "What now?" he growled, his tone exasperated. "I already told you. I was downstream all morning. I didn't see Tommy after he started bragging at the bend." "We found a lure with Tommy's blood on it," Amelia said, her eyes narrowing as she watched Jed's reaction. "Clara says she threw it at him during an argument, but he was alive when she left. You said you saw her heading toward the bend around 10. Did you see anyone else there? Or did you go to the bend yourself after she left?" Jed's scowl deepened, but a flicker of unease crossed his face, his hands clenching at his sides. "I didn't go to the bend," he said, his voice gruff. "I told you I was downstream. But I did see someone else heading that way, now that you mention it. Ben Foster. He's been fishing the flow for years, always thought he was better than Tommy. He looked mad, muttering something about Tommy always getting the best spots. I figured he was just jealous, but he trailed off, his gaze shifting to the ground. Amelia exchanged a glance with Lillian and Eleanor, her mind racing. Ben Foster, a new name in the mix, and one with a potential motive. "Thanks, Jed," she said, her tone clipped. "We'll check it out, but if we find out you're holding back on us, Samuel's going to have a lot more questions for you than we do." As they walked away, Eleanor lowered her voice, her binoculars swinging around her neck. "Ben Foster, huh?" she whispered, her eyes wide behind her glasses. "I've seen him around. He's always bragging about his catches, but Tommy always outshone him. If he was at the bend after Clara, he might have seen his chance to get rid of the competition for good." "Let's find Ben," Amelia said, her resolve hardening. "And we need to dig deeper into that cheating scandal, see how far it spread and who else might have wanted Tommy out of the way." The Willowmere Flow glittered in the afternoon light, its beauty a cruel contrast to the dark secrets it held. Amelia knew they were casting their net wider, but with every clue they were getting closer to the truth, one suspect at a time. Chapter 5. Netting the Killer. The Willowmere Flow glowed with the soft golden light of late afternoon, its waters reflecting the sinking sun in a shimmering dance that belied the darkness it had witnessed earlier that day. The riverbank was nearly deserted now, the spring fishing tournament a distant memory as the last of the yellow crime scene tape was rolled up by Samuel Carter's deputies, leaving the bend where Tommy, Trout, Larson had been found to the quiet whispers of the willows. The air carried the faint scent of the river, earthy and slightly fishy, mingled with the lingering sweetness of wildflowers that clung to the grassy slopes, their petals drooping as the day drew to a close. The golden-rod trophy had been tucked away, its gleam hidden from view, a silent acknowledgement that there would be no winner this year, not after murder had cast its shadow over the flow. Amelia Harrow stood near the bridge, her arms crossed as she watched Ben Foster pack up his gear, his wiry frame tense as he muttered to himself about the tournament's cancellation. The bloody lure and the rock with Tommy's blood on it weighed heavily on her mind, but Ben's name in the mix had added a new layer to the mystery. Clara Pike's story, that she'd thrown the lure at Tommy but left him alive, had held up so far, but the rock told a different tale, one of violence that ended in death. Jed Harper's alibi had checked out with the other anglers downstream, but Ben Foster was a wild card, and Amelia wasn't about to let him slip through their net without a closer look. Lillian Nassif and Eleanor Price stood beside her, their faces a mix of determination and exhaustion, the long day of sleuthing taking its toll, but their resolve unshaken. "Let's talk to Ben," Amelia said, her voice low as she led the way toward him, her braids swinging against her back. Jed saw him heading toward the bend after Clara left, and if he had a grudge against Tommy, he might have seen his chance to get rid of the competition for good. Lillian nodded, brushing a stray curl from her face as she adjusted her apron, her hands steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "Ben's always been a sore loser," she said, her tone thoughtful. "I remember him at the spring fling last year, threw a fit when Tommy beat him at the casting contest. If he thought Tommy was stealing his spotlight again, he might have snapped." She paused, then added with a small smirk, "Though if he's our killer, I hope he's better at hiding evidence than he is at keeping his temper in check." Eleanor chuckled, her binoculars dangling around her neck as she adjusted her glasses, her gray bangs fluttering in the breeze. "I'll leave the temper roasting to you, Lillian," she said, her voice tinged with amusement. "But I've got a bad feeling about Ben. He's got that shifty look, like a fish that knows it's about to be hooked. We need to press him hard, see if he cracks." Ben Foster looked up as the women approached, his wiry frame tensing as he slammed his tackle box shut, his narrow face set in a scowl. "What do you want?" he snapped, his voice sharp as he crossed his arms, his fishing rod leaning against a nearby tree. "I've got nothing to say about Tommy. I was fishing downstream all morning. Didn't see a thing." Amelia held up a hand, her expression unyielding as she met Ben's gaze. "We're not here to chat about the weather, Ben," she said, her voice firm. "Jed Harper saw you heading toward the bend around 10, right after Clara Pike left. That's the same time Tommy was killed. And we hear you've had it out for Tommy for a while. Always thought he was stealing your spotlight. Care to tell us what you were doing at the Bend?" Ben's scowl deepened, but a flicker of panic crossed his face, his hands clenching at his sides. "I didn't go to the Bend," he lied, his voice rising as he took a step back. "Jed's got it wrong. I was downstream, like I said. And yeah, I didn't like Tommy. He was always showing off, acting like he was the best fisherman on the flow. But I didn't kill him. You've got no proof." Lillian raised an eyebrow, her hands on her hips as she fixed Ben with a skeptical look. "No proof?" she echoed, her tone sharp. "Ben, we've got witnesses placing you at the scene, and a motive as big as the flow itself. You'd better start talking, or Samuel's going to have a lot more questions for you than we do." Ben's face paled, and he shook his head, his bravado crumbling as he ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Okay, fine," he said, his voice trembling. "I did go to the Bend. I wanted to confront Tommy about always getting the best spots. He was there, all right, but he was already on the ground when I got there, blood on his head. I saw Clara storming off just before I arrived, muttering about how he got what he deserved. I panicked, okay? I didn't want to get involved, so I left, but I swear I didn't touch him. He was already dead." Amelia exchanged a glance with Lillian and Eleanor, her mind racing. Ben's story lined up with Clara's timeline. She'd left Tommy alive after throwing the lure, but someone had come after her and finished the job with the rock. Ben's panic suggested he was telling the truth, but it also meant Clara had lied about Tommy being alive when she left. "We'll let Samuel sort this out," Amelia said, her tone firm. "But you're coming with us, Ben. We need to get Clara and Samuel together and figure out who's telling the truth." They found Clara Pike near the scoreboard, her red hair still pulled back in a tight ponytail, her freckled face pale as she sat on a bench, her hands twisting in her lap. Samuel Carter was nearby, talking to one of his deputies, his piney cologne cutting through the river air as he turned to greet them. "Clara, Ben, we need to talk," Amelia said, her voice steady as she gestured for Samuel to join them, Ben trailing behind with a scowl. Samuel strode over, his badge glinting in the fading light, his expression darkening as he took in the group. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low as he glanced at the bloody lure and rock, both now bagged as evidence in his deputy's hands. "Ben says he found Tommy already dead at the Bend," Amelia explained, her tone clipped. "Says he saw Clara leaving just before he got there, muttering about Tommy getting what he deserved. Clara claims she threw the lure at Tommy but left him alive. Someone's lying, and I think it's Clara." Clara's eyes filled with tears, her defiance crumbling as she shook her head, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to kill him," she cried, her hands trembling as she stood, her red ponytail whipping back and forth. "I lied, okay? I threw the lure at him and we argued. He laughed at me, said I'd never beat him. I picked up a rock and hit him, just once on the head. I didn't think it would kill him. There was blood, and he fell. And I panicked. I ran. I thought he might still be alive, but I didn't check. I just wanted him to stop laughing." Samuel's jaw tightened, his expression grim as he stepped forward, pulling out his handcuffs. "Clara Pike, you're under arrest for the murder of Tommy Larson," he said, his voice steady as he cuffed her, his movements precise. "You have the right to remain silent." He continued the Miranda rights as he led her to his truck, her sobs echoing across the quiet riverbank. Ben Foster let out a shaky breath, his shoulders slumping as he watched Clara being led away. "I told you I didn't do it," he muttered, his voice low. "I knew she had a temper, but I didn't think she'd go that far." Eleanor wiped a tear from her eye, her binoculars forgotten, as she adjusted her glasses. "I feel a little bad for her," she said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "She's so young, and all that anger over a trophy. It's such a waste." "She made a choice," Amelia said quietly, her gaze fixed on the river, the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. "A bad one. Tommy didn't deserve to die over a fishing tournament." She sighed, then turned to Lillian and Eleanor, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Let's head back to the inn. I could use a cup of tea, and I bet Lillian's got some scones stashed away." Lillian chuckled, the sound a welcome relief as she linked arms with Eleanor, her apron flapping in the breeze. "You know I always keep a few in reserve," she said, her tone warm. And after today, I'm adding extra jam. We've earned it. The Willowmere Inn glowed warmly as they arrived, its windows casting a cozy light across the garden where Hank Rawls had once caused such a ruckus, tearing up the flower boxes in a fit of rage. Inside, the dining room was quiet, the day's events having kept most guests away, and Amelia sank into a chair by the fireplace, the crackling flames soothing her frayed nerves. Lillian bustled in with a tray of scones and a pot of chamomile tea, the scent of baked goods filling the air, while Eleanor plopped down with a dramatic sigh, kicking off her sneakers. I swear, if I have to chase down one more murderer, I'm investing in better shoes, Eleanor said, rubbing her feet with a grimace. Those river roots are my nemesis. I'm one trip away from joining the fish in the flow. Amelia laughed, the tension easing from her chest as she took a sip of tea, the warmth spreading through her. You did great, Eleanor, she said, her voice soft. We all did. Tommy's family will have closure now, and Willowmere's a little safer. She paused, her gaze drifting to the window, where the flow's waters shimmered in the distance. Though I can't help but wonder about that packed relic rumor from the last case. Makes me think the flow's got more secrets than fish. Lillian nodded, spreading jam on a scone with a smile. One mystery at a time, Amelia, she said, her tone gentle. For now, let's just enjoy the peace, and hope the next tournament doesn't end with someone getting hooked in all the wrong ways. The women clinked their teacups in a quiet toast, the firelight dancing in their eyes as they savored the moment of calm. Outside, the Willowmere Flow whispered its ancient song, its waters calm once more, the darkness of the day giving way to the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Spring in Willowmere had taken a deadly turn, but with the killer caught and the town at ease, the women of the Willowmere Inn knew they'd face whatever came next, together.